distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, friends and enemies.
Hey, welcome to this week's episode of the Make It Plain podcast. Thanks for listening if you're listening, and also thanks for watching if you're watching on YouTube. As always, please do like, subscribe, support, do all the things. It does help. Thank you for all the feedback as well. I did post on Insta this week a question for mailbags. If you do want to ask any questions, there's a link up there. Well, there's a story on Insta where you can post a comment, send an email to mip@blackunity.org.uk. That's mip@blackunity.org.uk. Or just post on one of the socials wherever you see on YouTube. And in the subsequent episode, I will try and get to the questions in one of the intros. I did have something to talk about today. One of the intros, because we just lost Paul Stephenson, who was a UK civil rights legend that you may or may not be aware of. This week, do have an interview with Lavinya Stennett. Lavinya started the Black Curriculum. Black Curriculum has done lots of work pushing the idea of black history in schools, working with stakeholders in there, really trying to push the idea we need to have a black curriculum. Really important work. And Lavinya has a book coming out called Omitted, which is all about, what's black history being lost from schools, what that means, etc. So I have an interview with her after the break. But like I said, I did want to do the interview today on Paul Stephenson because he passed away a few weeks ago. I actually wrote an obituary in The Guardian for Paul. Paul Stephenson was a UK civil rights icon, right? Someone who really, contributed massively to the civil rights movement in the UK. Interestingly enough, he died just after Black History Month we have here in October, and in Black History Month, the theme this year was reclaiming the narratives. And I do a lot of Black Employment Month, Black History Month, Black Employment Month events, and I do go around and talk to people about different figures, etc. And one of the things that gets said everywhere, whether that be prison, whether that be corporate, whether that be schools, same thing about why don't we hear more about black British people. And me, I ain't really on the black British thing, but I will say, why don't we hear about more black people who did things in the British Isles, on these islands? We do tend not to. There does tend to be a focus on America. And that, that makes sense for lots of reasons. But thinking about Britain, thinking about people on these islands, we did have black people here have a massive history of resistance and mobilization, etc. And we had our own civil rights movement. There was our own Black Power movement here. When I say our own doesn't, that's again kind of a bit narrow, but our civil rights movement, our Black Power movement was connected to the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement that was happening around the black world. But there's no difference. We had that movement here, and Paul Stephenson is a perfect example of that. Paul, I'm going to a little bit about the Bristol bus boycott, a bit of history for people who may or may not know, give a bit of details. I was also fortunate to interview Paul Stephenson before he died. I also interviewed Roy Hackett and Guy Reed Bailey, who were both part of the bus boycott. So I've really got loads of different information, angles on it, and it's a really important facet of history. Before that, though, I just wanted to put Paul's important because, for lots of reasons, but actually, Paul Stephenson was born in the UK before Windrush. So we often think about the Windrush in the UK in 1948, the first, certainly wasn't the first, I believe it was the second boat that came from the Caribbean, but it's a major boat, and it marked the start of mass migration from the colonies to the mother country. And most of us are in this period, descend from this period. My dad comes in 1960, but actually my mum was born here too, and her dad came similar to Paul Stephenson actually in between the First World War and Second World War. And so Paul Stephenson is a good reminder that actually there were black people here before Windrush, right? He was born in 1937. His mum was in the country before. His mum was mixed with a West African father and a white mother, and his mum was in the country as well. So in 1937 he's born, right? He also ends up being evacuated. So I actually posted this on Twitter because there's this whole thing about Blitz. There's this TV show, I think it's Apple TV, about the Blitz, and it's a black kid in the Blitz. The Blitz, for those who don't know, is when there was bombing in the Second World War in the UK. That was called the Blitz, and they would evacuate children away from the cities, and children would go and live in the countryside with foster families because it was safer, right? Because the cities were getting blown up blown to pieces. I mean, Europe does have wars, and white people often don't like each other, tend to kill each other, and during this period, the kids were evacuated. And in the Blitz TV show, it's a black child, right? And I say all the racists. I can't say all the racists. Given last week, all the people with overt racial prejudice, they on Twitter getting mad. Oh, why are you erasing us? Why are you erasing us? What's this blah? Reality is there were black kids in the UK at this time. Paul Stephenson was one of those children. He was evacuated out into the countryside and lived with 6 other kids for years. He actually stayed there for 7 years in the countryside, even after the war. But his mother was in the armed services, Women's Auxiliary Unit, and his mother had difficulty getting back into civilian life after the war, and so only brought him back after 7 years. So they literally have a person, a historical figure in the UK we can point to who just passed away, who was evacuated in the Blitz. So the idea that there were no black people in that, complete and utter nonsense. Stop it, right? Wars more generally, First World War, Second World War, they were world wars. Britain wasn't these islands. Britain was this vast empire where fighting took place across the empire. Africans involved, Asians involved, Caribbeans involved. We're involved, been involved in this war. Yet, I grew up in school watching stupid movies like Memphis Belle, old school movies about the war. You don't see no black people. You would think the way we think about the Second World War, First World War, is that it was just white people. Not the case. Not the case at all. Millions of black and brown people were involved in these wars, right? The war effort, in the fighting in the war, building up to the war, etc. And even in the island during the Blitz, there were black kids, including Paul Stephenson, who were evacuated. So Paul Stephenson comes to fame, comes to prominence because of, I mentioned before, the Bristol bus boycott. And the Bristol bus boycott is 1963. And now thinking about the UK, big difference to the UK and America is there are no, there's no racist laws in the UK per se on the islands, not in the colonies. Lots of racist laws in the colonies, oh my god, but in the islands not so much. And so there was no, we don't have Jim Crow segregation, we don't have open segregation like Rosa Parks is on the bus is in Montgomery. In Montgomery, there's actual laws that ban black people from sitting in certain parts of the bus, right? They don't happen in the UK. Weren't necessary because we weren't here. Because you weren't on the island, you could have racist laws in the colonies, no racist laws in the UK. Doesn't mean the UK wasn't racist. And so Bristol bus boycott was 63. They basically, the bus company said, look, we won't hire black and brown people for any other jobs on the buses than menial work. So you could clean the bus, we'll hire you to clean the buses, but you can't be a conductor, can't be a driver, can't be in those well-paid professions because we don't like you, right? So this is the thing in the UK, there was no laws against racial discrimination, which meant that people were free to discriminate. And so we call it the colour bar because there was a bar based on colour, but it was more informal, it depended. So in London, they're hiring us to go and run the train, drive the trains, do the buses, etc. But in Bristol, bus companies like, nah, no thanks, don't want you. All right. So what happened then was the community reacted. Right. Always react. We don't just sit there passively. We always respond. And Paul Stephenson was important in this effort because they had to prove that that there was a racial bar. Right? If we're going to mobilize people, we need to make sure that we have evidence that it is because of racism. So what Paul does, and you have to imagine, back in the day, at this point, most people who were black and brown most black people were from the Caribbean, heavily Caribbean. Initially, Paul Stevenson's family was West African as well. So again, different trajectory at the time. Mostly people from the Caribbean, had Caribbean accents, sounded Jamaican, like you could tell on the phone. Paul, however, born in the UK, was evacuated to Essex. Sounds very English. So he calls up the bus company and says he's got somebody who could be a great candidate to work on the buses. Are there any jobs? Can we come down? They assume he's white because he sounds English. They will go down, takes Guy Reed Bailey down with him. I told these stories in the Guardian Black Lives series, and you can see. We'll put the links to those articles in there. I did Paul Stephenson, Guy Reed Bailey, and Roy Hackett. So they go down to the bus company. When they turn up and they're black, oh, sorry, there's no jobs. What a mistake, my bad. So look, they clearly know. Look, there we go. We know for a fact because you're black. There were also other experiences. Actually, Roy Hackett talked about seeing somebody come out of the the place crying because he was told to his face, "You're black. You can't. We just don't want you." Right. So very, very, very big sore point in the community. So they organize, they get together, they form an organization, and they say, "Look, we're not going to get the bus. Done that, not getting the buses." So they stop, refuse to get the buses. This goes on for months. They're picketing, blockading the buses. They get the local MP involved, Tony Benn, and eventually, bus company backs down. And in a combination of history, and you can see this combination of history with the US, it is the same day as the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech that the Bristol bus company, the omnibus company, say that yes, they're going to stop the boycott, we're going to employ black and brown people to work on the buses. So this is all happening at the same time. It's all in the mix. It's mobilizations here. Paul's massively important part of that. He doesn't stop there though. Goes on. Paul organises a one-man sit-in at the Bay Horse pub. So one of the things that pubs would there were a lot of racist pubs. There's still a lot of racist pubs. Number one recommendation: you see that British flag, English flag flying outside the pub, stay away. Unless it's a football, you don't need to go inside that pub. Just walk on by. And so this pub was notorious, a Bay Horse pub, and they wouldn't serve black people. So he goes in, sits down at the bar, I want a drink. They say no. He refuses to leave. He ends up getting arrested. Goes to court. It's a big case. He challenges it. He ends up winning the case in court. It becomes a big thing, right? Paul Stephenson, Bristol bus boycott, and then all of these things lead to, this is 64, the Bay Horse, I believe. All these things lead to more pressure being put on the government. And when Labour government comes in 65, Tony Benn is influential in that Harold Wilson, who is a Labour Prime Minister, had actually written to Paul after he was arrested for the one-man sit-in, promising him to change the law. And guess what? 65, they changed the law. We get the 1965 Racial Relations Act, which is very, very, very limited, outlaws discrimination in public accommodation. Then that gets made 68 strengthened, 74 strengthened. Eventually, racial discrimination in housing is made illegal. Racial discrimination look, if you listen to this podcast enough, read anything that I've read, you know that I don't think those changes were that great. You know that I think those changes are massively limited. You know that I'll tell you right now, they ain't really ended racism. What they've really done is stopped overt racial prejudice, but racism still carries on. But the reality is, they have made changes. I'm a professor of black studies. Ain't no way I've got a job professor of anything if the legal framework didn't change to outlaw overt discrimination. This wouldn't happen. Wouldn't be here. Right? In terms of housing, where people live, difficult for us to move. There's structural problems, etc., etc. But there has been access to some of us who were lucky enough to do that because of these changes. So things have changed. I would not say they're any better, but they've definitely changed, and they've changed because of people like Paul Stephenson. And then after the Act comes in, it creates the Racial Relations Board, then the Commission for Racial Equality. So my mum actually worked for Commission for Racial Equality, Carol Andrews, for years and years and years, going to places, challenging them. She tells a story about going to this really racist pub in Dudley, near Birmingham, and having to literally challenge the owner and say, look, this is the law, right? So this stuff happened, and this stuff did make changes, made it different, made it so that overt racial prejudice has not been a feature of my life, really, right? In any meaningful way. That's a change. Limited is a change. And we owe those changes to people like Paul. Paul also went on a big tour around America. He met Muhammad Ali in London, befriended Muhammad Ali, actually started the Muhammad Ali Sports Association. There was Muhammad Ali Sports Centre in Birmingham because of this connection. And just did loads of work, even carried on later in his life, worked with UNESCO, was trying to get Bristol to do a museum of transatlantic slavery. Was really, really, really tireless campaigner, did loads of work, was Bristol's first social worker, worked in communities, went up and down the country, tireless campaigner. Unfortunately, he had Parkinson's, and his battle with Parkinson's is what killed him. When I interviewed him a few years ago, very, very difficult interview because he was very clearly impaired by that. That didn't slow him down. No, he still was very, very steadfast in what he was trying to do. Has a book, actually. One of the few people from this time that has a book. I believe it's called Memoirs of a Black Englishman, which has so much detail. It's so rich about what happened, where it happened, what took place, what it was like. And I really would recommend, if you can pick up a copy of Memoirs of a Black Englishman, I would definitely say it's worth doing that. But people like Paul Stephenson, look, we have to remember that we had battles on these shores. There are people on these shores who've done really important work, right? Even if I can argue the limits of it, the merits of it, civil rights, I'm a radical, I'm going to say, I'm going to always say we need more, but that work's important, right? And now struggles are massively important. And they've just been overlooked. We just have to be honest, they've just been overlooked. Paul Stephenson is someone who should be taught to everybody. It ties really well into our interview with Lavinya Stennett, right? Because this is a kind of figure that we should know. British civil rights movement, we should all know this. British Black Power movement, we should all know this, right? Paul Stephenson shouldn't be like a marginal figure. Paul Stephenson should be really somebody just on the curriculum, just taught, that you just understand and know the struggles, battles that we've gone through in these lands, right? Connected. And even that whole story about him in the Blitz and all that, that tells us a story about Britain that we just don't know. We really have been omitted, which this is a nice segue into talking about, into our interviews. The interview is with Lavinya Stennett, and it is all about, there's issues about the black curriculum, about her new work, Omitted, and just how important it is to put us back into the picture. Also, I completely almost forgot to say to our American cousins, I talked about America a lot, Happy Genocide Day! For those, Thanksgiving was just yesterday if you're just listening. But yeah, please do do enjoy Genocide Day. Try not to choke on the turkey bones while you are reveling in Genocide Day. But anyway, that's the intro. Please do listen to the interview with Lavinya. Really important work, really powerful discussion. And yeah, thanks again for all the support. All right, so we're very, very happy to have Lavinya Stennett with us from the Black Curriculum. Also has a book coming out that we will discuss. I really just want to say welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, so the Black Curriculum has been a really big, had a massive impact. I think I've referenced it a lot of times. People have talked about it. Could you tell us a bit about what is the Black Curriculum and why did you start it?
Yeah, okay. So the Black Curriculum is a national movement as well as a social enterprise that is seeking to basically change the way that Black history is engaged with. So the reason why we do what we do is because young people are still, unfortunately, learning a very Eurocentric, westernized and sanitized version of history across all their subjects, not just history. And we want to basically ensure that they are getting the truth, they are empowered, and that they can take this information to kind of use in their lives. So therefore kind of making their learning active, and it's not just something that they're just like, receiving in school and then go home and it's just divorced. So yeah, we started in 2019. I started it alongside Bethany Thompson and Lisa Kennedy, and it grew exponentially, of course, with the resurgence of Black Lives Matter in 2020 following the murder of George Floyd. Uh, there was a lot of interest, and I think for us that kind of interest supported our aims, but also kind of made us see that this is a type of work that needs more than just like buzz. It started off before the buzz and probably will continue long after it. It will continue long after it. So, we work with schools and heritage organizations, cultural partners like Spotify, Lush, Vogue, just basically to make sure that the conversation around Black history is accessible and it's woven throughout all British society.
Okay, well, I read you said 2019. What were you a student at the time, right?
I just finished a degree in SOAS doing African studies and development. And yeah, for me, that was like the first time in my life that I had actually been able to kind of utilize the knowledge in a practical way, particularly around African history and like the true version of what like development and underdevelopment was. And yeah, it just kind of brought alive to me the fact that we have our own history here in the UK that isn't, it's not utilized. And I wanted to do that. So yeah.
Okay. And what was that like as a student, young person? You see a problem. What was that like starting the Black Curriculum?
I would say it was really fun. I would say back in 2019, because of the networks. I think as a student, sometimes like your focus in university is like it's production. I've just got to get this paper out. I just have to kind of like churn in the next assignment. And I think sometimes the networking and the ideas and the curation of ideas into something like for the community is missed out on. But I was very kind of deep in the community, doing a lot of activism since like 2016 as the working class officer. Then later on as my friend and I co-founded a society called Art and African Mind. And so there was just so much space of like possibility. And that to me was the fun part. I would say that it was the transition though from university into a structure that, teachers have been working in for hundreds of years with like zero to no change, where there's like just limited resources and a lack of just critical thinking. I wouldn't say critical thinking, just a lack of like ambition because of the fact that it has been under resourced. It was very difficult to translate what we saw into like that structure. So we were hit with a lot of like, this is not going to work, or you're kind of like aiming too much, too high, too soon. And I think just that translation into the education system, into the grant making world, which we're trying to get money from in order to kind of catapult what we're doing, was extremely difficult, especially in 2019, which ultimately changed the year after. But I would say that it started off very fun. It still is fun, but like working within the reality and the old structures in the UK is yeah, not for the weak.
How bad is the problem in the UK? You give listeners an idea about just how bad important is and how bad is the gap.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I just want to dispel. I think that's a really fantastic question. I want to dispel the myth that the UK is a place of opportunity. The UK is a place of opportunity if you have access to capital. It's a place of opportunity if you have access to elitist networks and you have time by your side. I think for the ordinary everyday person, student, working person, the UK is a place where it's very dismal. It's a very dismal, very slow, um, inward looking country. And I think that kind of rubs off on like what people can do and what they can achieve. There's a certain cap that I talk about with my friends a lot around like, just even what success looks like. It's like you get to a certain point and it's like, no, you can't do that, or you're too loud, or you're too this, too that. And I think that is like the condition of the UK has kind of like is continued like that because of the lack of embracing of people of not only African descent, but the migrants that are invited over to build the country. And I think it lacks vision. So some people can, say that, oh, the UK has helped them to like, I don't know, get a job. But beyond that, what does the UK do to support communities to like, revitalize hope and all these, fantastic things it talks about in its vision to rebuild Britain. But the reality is that it's a very dismal place for anyone with any ambition and hope, especially if you're Black.
So you don't agree with Kemi Badenoch that the UK is the best place to be if you're Black?
No.
No. So with the UK, what I would tell my American friends a lot is everything's about class. Not really a race problem. It's all about class. Racism isn't really a problem here. So how do you deal with those kind of? You must get that feedback. You must get that feedback when you're trying to do this work.
All the time. And it's often very like subliminal in a way. Like people would just like say that those kind of comments in a way where it's like I kind of agree with what you're doing, but I don't want the focus to be too much on race, and therefore I'm just gonna say that it's not really a race problem, it's a caste one. And it's like the two are intertwined. Like you cannot talk about race without talking about class. Like the whole idea of the whole reason we're here as Black people is to do with a labor class that has been erased from history. So I think that just even in the teaching of Black history as well, there is like there is this very narrow road that I think we're trying to create more inroads into, where people are more likely to see like um class and race as something that is more of an American thing rather than a British thing. So when I think about like the civil rights movements in the UK, it's like, oh wow, that really happened here. Versus Henry VIII had a trumpeter. It's like that's an easier narrative for us to kind of like talk about in the UK. Or like Sarah Bonetta Forbes, because she was associated with royalty. And I think there's like these like very yes, subliminal narratives and ways that people think about Black people in the UK and Black history that is very elitist and kind of is divorced from the reality of like working class relations and Black history being one of the same thing. It's the same.
Yeah, I mean, we just Paul Stephenson just died recently at the Bristol bus boycott. And it's like, I didn't really know that much until recently about like the Bristol bus boycott, British civil rights. Why is that? Why is it so?
Underground, like the Bristol one specifically.
Yeah, I mean, just Jim. I mean, like Bristol's such a big thing, and it directly leads to change. It's at the same time as the U.S. civil rights movement. You think we'd know about it, but why is it that most of us don't? We never talk about it. It's not schools.
Wow, I think that's so interesting one because you can look at it from different angles, like the lens of solidarity. I think that the way that Britain stratifies its society with like ethnicity, like Asian, Black, white, there's like these ideas that further perpetuate the divides that exist in society. That history has showed us had like that's not how society has evolved or what the Bristol bus boycotts happened because Asians and Black people rallied together to ensure that there was like, justice, if you like, justice. And I think that, yeah, by not talking about the Bristol bus boycotts, it kind of further perpetuates that division that emboldens a majority white community. I think also there is a focus on London a lot, like London histories or just metropolitan histories. Let's just say that rather than like um, the histories of not only just Bristol but Liverpool and Wales and like communities that have actually long before London made inroads into racial justice work that we are kind of building on today. So I think there's just a lack of like regional awareness that has a lot to do with like the buzz on like, the Caribbeans came to London. But there was Somali communities way before in Wales. And I think that is like, I don't know why it's a less popular narrative, but perhaps it's to do with like, you know, what um what reinforces power for Britain ultimately. That's just my thinking. Um yeah, I also learned about the Bristol bus boycott very recently, like in context of my lifetime. It was like 2020, yeah, 2020, I would say.
Man.
And even so, I had to like do my own digging and research because what existed was very like just top line narratives of like, oh yeah, it was like similar to the Montgomery bus boycott, but it was very different context, and we can't keep comparing it to America. So yeah, I think and then to that other point as well, I think civil rights has been something that we just don't celebrate here. It's like we don't think that we have room for insurrection in the UK. It's almost like you have just to obey and follow the law, and like that isn't a part of our history, but it really is. So
Yeah. So when you said you work with schools, what kind of work do you do with schools? And what does that look like? Now, when
yeah.
you work with schools, what do you do?
hmm So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 services that we offer schools primarily, which are our core programs. So I'll break it down. Youth programs, teacher programs. So the teacher programs basically look at training them and like reworking their resources. So we would, for example, go into a school, they would say, okay, like, we're really trying in maths and we don't really know how to integrate Black history without it being tokenistic. Could you help us? So we would look at their scheme of work and then like look at examples and ways that we could like integrate Black history throughout their curriculum or scheme of work for that year or year group. So that's one way. And then we also give them the training on how to kind of continue to embed that across the whole year. So it's not just like a one-off tick box exercise that they do, but it's like an ongoing professional development that enables them to like, you know, see that they can be rewarded rather than punished. Because I think some teachers often like think, oh, okay, like I got to do this because I don't know, someone's going to say, oh, I'm being racist if I don't do this. But it's actually, if you do this, there is so much benefits for your students, which connects back to the youth programs that we do. So we go into the schools and we deliver like music-based programs, again, like trying to reinforce the orality of our culture so that it's not just like, oh, in 1968 this happened. Like that's not really going to be empowering for students. How can we get them to see mediums that they use at home and like things that they actually really love and enjoy, coinciding with Black histories across the UK. So we have a springboard program for that. And then we have lastly a Duke of Edinburgh style award where they can get accredited. The older students in secondary school, they can use their points on their UCAS. But they have to basically do like a research and campaigning project. And then they get awarded for it. And then they can join the Black curriculum after, they can get work experience with our partners. And yeah, there's like viable ways that they can, you know, transition from school, which is a hub of indoctrination, into a place in the world where they can actually own their history, own their agency and like ideas and be paid for it ultimately. So yeah.
Good. Well, it was powerful. You mentioned maths. How was that relevant to like a topic like maths?
Yeah. Math, science, STEM, like I think that's honestly one of the biggest misconceptions, that Black history is only for the social sciences. So with maths, we would look at like countries in Africa that have different mathematical systems, for example, to come to the same conclusion. We would look at the history of the maths as well, like even our whole like conception of how maths has been created. We got our ideas from not only Africa and the Middle East, but like the originators haven't got their credit for that. Also, there are individuals who are I'll get into the examples after, but there are also individuals who've created different theories. Like I think there's a Chica method. So we'd basically kind of like bring in and try to weave in from primary school to secondary school different maths like processes to get to their solutions. But also, one thing that we try to do as well is that it's not just like bringing people in and saying, okay, this happened and therefore you should know this. So that it's kind of tokenistic and surface level. If we're like using examples of, let's just say like in year 1, you're learning how to count to 20. What books could you use that are good, or like objects could you use that are African in nature to basically teach a young student to get there? So it's not just like looking at maths as like the way to diversify the topic, but it's actually using the methods, using the examples, using the books, your pens, like everything around the teaching to reinforce that like there's a place for the identity of Black people with this face. So it's not just a white subject taught by a white teacher. So yeah, the teaching also has a lot to do with a lot of it as well. Or like the delivery of that. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I'm being devil's advocate. I say, why is it important? Is it actually necessary?
Yeah. I answered this question a few weeks ago, and I think it's important for all students because there is issues that we have, and one of the biggest issues is that this year we had our own racial riots. Apparently, that ended in the 60s because Britain's no longer racist. And I think the hugest like issues right now is that there's a lack of understanding of the contributions that Black people have made to the UK, but also the world, and like how in society, if we don't understand our class relations, the history of that, we're just going to repeat basically the same things that happen. So I think it's important to build social cohesion. I think it's important for all students to learn this because they can have a better sense of relating with each other, a better sense of identity. Even when they leave the country, you know, you don't go through an identity crisis because you know that your history originated before Britain. Like, there's a lot of people that haven't stepped out of the UK that don't actually understand like how their identities coincide with people from Haiti or Brazil because they're only used to speaking English. They see English as like the only like language that all countries should speak. And there's just like this kind of imperial notion that they still carry around. And I think Black history is about, it's not just about history, it's about giving people a perspective of how to integrate with the world and move with the world as it has been, but Britain hasn't kind of caught up to that. So I say social cohesion, identity, um, and just empowerment. Like, why would you not want to learn? Like, knowledge is everything. You have knowledge, you're able to advocate better for yourself, for your families, for your societies, and like, the typical phrase, knowledge is power, but it really is. It's power so much as you can use it. So I think that's why it's important.
It's interesting you talk about the riots, and I know we saw recently that this TV show Blitz there's a TV show Blitz. It's about Blitz in a Second World War in England, and kids being evacuated. And on the poster, there's a Black kid being evacuated, right, 1940s, and some white people got very upset. They're like, "Why are you lying? Why are you pretending? Why are you blackwashing history?" And then this was a complete lack of understanding. There were Black kids in the Blitz, right? Paul Stephenson himself was evacuated. But that kind of ignorance it's just so commonplace. People don't understand that we've
The
been here.
ignorance is blitz. That's what it is. That's so bad. How could you say that? I think, again, like, that's just due to, like, even when we're thinking about what we're doing in the it's not just the curriculum. It's okay. First of all, it's the people who are writing the books that need this information as well. So I'm thinking like exam-born writers, book writers that are gonna, have their books disseminated in schools. Those students and those parents are now going to look to the media for those things to be reinforced. And so it's like, if we're not kind of penetrating the school system to like showcase different realities of British history, then I think that like our media is only going to continue to perpetuate like a whitewashed version, and then therefore people are going to be like, well, what, blackwashing history. Same thing with, what's it called, Bridgerton and all these other kind of older shows that hold on to like Britain as this like white country nation. So
Yeah. If there was, do you want to drop it with us? Like you said, there's one piece of history that's really important to know. What would it be? Is it like a particular story you like to tell, or a particular nugget you like to drop?
one this
One piece, one thing that's like, wow, that might shock people, or maybe surprise people, or be
in,
interested in improving.
in British history, right?
Yeah.
Ooh, that is a very good question. Well, maybe I would have said 4 years ago, like, the Race Relations Act and like what Britain did, but I just think there's just so much focus there now. I would go to maybe the 70s, like 70s, 80s, because like,
Yeah.
I'm an education fiend. I think that there was a lot of work that happened around that time, particularly within the Caribbean community, Trinidadians, Grenadans coming together to literally mobilize for the health and the future of young Black boys, particularly. And I think that, the whole idea of like education being subnormal, and, even this is lesser known, but Black people being taken to ball stores. Is that what you call them?
Ball store? Yeah.
Well, yeah, a ball store, because they were deemed to be like, you know, deficient in any kind of way, intellectually, socially. There is I think there needs to be more education around that, and seeing how those links continue today. Because I think it's almost like the way in which it has been told is like, oh yeah, that happened in the 70s. I did see a documentary on that. Oh, it happened in the 70s, but like it's just translated into the modern day context. And I think that is one thing that I think I'd like to kind of talk about more, less about like how it was operationalized, but more about how the communities kind of mobilized around that creation of Saturday schools, creation of like these boards to keep the councils that were, issuing these reports accountable, and like just the continued pressure that was done. I think that like celebrating our own like movements are important. Yeah.
Mm. You said before that 2020 everything took off, right? And the wave of anti-racism. What's it been like since? Is that still the case? Has the wave crashed? Where are we now?
Oh wow. That was like sometimes I think back and I was like, was that real? Like that whole period, was that real? And it just didn't feel real. It just doesn't feel real because it's still like the remnants of that still linger on. So yeah, 2020, 2021, we saw an upsurge in our social media of 150%. Our bookings, like we started off with like 1,500 beginning of May,
Right.
social media, Instagram particularly. By the end of June, we were on 142,000. So I think people saw Black and they were like, "Wow, click!" And along with other ones. So it was just insane. Like, and that translated internally. The bookings, it was chaos. Beautiful chaos, if one could argue in a way, because it was like, okay, finally the world sees it, but it was just like, at the same time, this is not sustainable, and you guys don't really have intentions to stay on. So what we would see in our programs is that some, you know, institutions would pick it up, drop it. We will come back into contact with them. Oh no, our focus now is migration. Or like literally verbatim would be like, this is not our focus anymore. Then we would see. I'm just gonna say it how it is. We had a funder, or a sponsor. They wanted to play strong and mighty. Where your paternal boss. And here's some money to do some work. And it's like, those are your true colors, And it's just like, we can't work with organizations like that. If your values are underlined and you really just don't, like, if you're supporting an organization like the Black Curriculum that's growing, it's a startup, you got to allow space for us to make mistakes. But it's almost like there was like this, I don't know, like the true colors basically came out from a lot of organizations and institutions, and the drop off in 2022, wow. It was almost like we could map it on a graph. It would literally be like
Right.
that. And 2022, 2023, we saw that we had fewer but more deeper relationships with schools and councils that were really kind of committed to this. But I would say like 70 to 80% of the people that came in are no longer there.
Right.
Yeah, but it's expected, isn't it?
Mm.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that is what happened. Yeah, people cared for a bit and then moved on. Right. Unfortunately, what's the policy like? Have you had much? Do you think the policy changed? Do you have much impact on policy, curriculum?
Yes. So 2019, we started off by literally went on foot to the Department for Education, knocked on the door, said we want to get a meeting in with the lady who was the head of curriculum policy at the time. She was like, yeah, I love what you're doing, but it's not up to us, it's up to the ministers. So you need to get in contact with them. And then 2020, we did just that. So we wrote a letter to Nick Gibb and Gavin Williamson, and they basically wrote back to say, wow, we really support the work you're doing, continue, but we can't dictate what schools do because they're free to teach whatever. Same year, we obviously had guidance from Ms. Kemi Badenoch to say that if schools do teach Black history, which they were encouraging us to do, they're breaking the law. If you teach white supremacy, well, she said if you're teaching white supremacy, it's a fact, you're breaking the law. And we came from the perspective that if we're going to teach Black history, then we're going to teach the history of white supremacy in this country, because that is what a lot of the journeys have been predicated on. So schools were like, "Oh, we're not sure if we could work with you," sort of thing. So it kind of did impact a lot of the perception of what we do, whilst the focus kind of dwindled. And then in 2024, we ran a roundtable in June to basically look at the data of the impact of the Black curriculum, one, and two, the model history curriculum that the last government were trying to create. So basically, they put together, without consultation, a group of people to create a model history working group, to create this new curriculum that just was it was just very narrow in focus. We tore it apart at the round table basically. But this new government, So yeah, I actually just skipped 2020. We had a huge campaign that had over 200,000 people supporting it. Um,
Well,
yeah, it was called TBH 365, and we still have the currents of that going on. But I'd say that politically, there has there hasn't been clear inroads. Like when it was Nadine Zahawi, it was very much like, we had like celebrities like Troy Deeney try to kind of, get through to them and appeal to them, and they just weren't interested. So I think that there it won't change in that way. It will happen, but I think the way in which the inroads have maybe in previous years been made to kind of get Black history be embedded through ministers and through government, it's not going to happen that way. Do you know what I mean?
even with this government now, the government change.
No, I think okay. So what will happen is it's my prediction. What will happen is that they've got this curriculum review. They've got so much people, handing in their feedback to this consultation. Um, the structures of which they've created this consultation to happen are already limited. So they have one Black person on the panel, Fumilola, who is designated with DEI. So already, like, that already tells me whatever you're planning to do, it's just not going to be enough.
Yeah,
So I think that they are probably going to do something around, like, the teaching, or it might be BAME, like similar to
yeah.
what Wales has done. It might be Black, but it's definitely not going to be looking at some of the things that we think are relevant for young people to be learning in current contemporary society. So I think, eventually it will come to a point where they might listen. They will put out this curriculum, but they might take a while to get to the point where stakeholders like the Black curriculum and other organizations will be kind of listened to, and then they be like, okay, yeah, we agree. They will hit the cherry on top.
Wow. So sounds like you're not that confident the actual curriculum is going to change too much
I
within
think
this
it will. I think it will happen. It's just the medium as to which it will
media.
happen is very different. Yeah, because I think people believe in like traditional routes. Like, we've got to, and I did as well. We got to campaign. We got to like, write an open letter. We got to get it. And I think that like those things do work to get the attention and to get groundswell. But in terms of like talking to this particular government, they're not interested in things being very like, truthful. So yeah.
So you have to do grand up more than like, okay. Which I mean is the history of, and thinking about the history of the 70s Black education movement. That's what it was really. It was, we'll just do it ourselves, we'll organize, we'll create some stuff, and that did lead to some change, at least.
Exactly. I think the best thing this government can do is just give us money to just do it ourselves. I think that's the best thing they can do. Don't do it yourselves. Give us the money, let us do it. And hopefully, the academies also will catch on, because one can only make this work successful as so long as the like education system is open to doing so. So if there are
Mhm.
still structures in place where like academies are prioritizing like um exam success over like the well-being of students, then like this work isn't really going to be as impactful. And I think this is probably another point that like the two forces like coincide but also delete each other at the same time. So if you have a government that's like, oh, let's create curriculum change, but then also let's like, not invest in SEN students, or like maybe let's invest in SEN students but then forget like to talk about racism explicitly and say reparations is not going to be discussed, then how do you expect the forces to work together? They're like opposing. So it's almost like a science. It's just, yeah, I just don't think sometimes the variables happen at the same time.
Okay. Sure. Well, you've got a book coming out too, right? Called,
Yes.
I had the name of
Omit
the book.
it.
Omitted it, well, completely. I omitted the name from my memory. It's called Omitted. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the book about? Why are you writing the book?
Yeah.
What's the book about?
So again, I was approached in 2021 to write a book. So it's changed a lot because I think that over time I've had, sorry, can you hear?
Yes.
So over time I've had time to think about, like see the journey of the Black curriculum actually grow as I'm writing, which has therefore kind of changed what I'm writing about. Um, Even my own perspective on just Black history has changed. And so initially it was about Black histories. But now the focus is more on like reparations and
You did say there was a chicken inside. I did hear the chicken, so
it's loud. It's so boisterous. Anyway, um, the focus is reparations and yeah, its connection to like world histories.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so reparations, specifically about reparations. Why the change? Why reparations?
So for me, it's never changed. So like I stepped into this, I didn't say this, but I think it's 2017 actually, when I was at SOAS, they used to do like all these like talks or they would promote talks that were happening. I remember there was one on reparations I went to. It was at the bottom of this house in like Houston. And
Mm.
there was a lady called Vereen Shepherd who was there. And she was still like the Holocaust. Then there was more reparation. And I was like, oh my gosh, like when is this gonna happen? Because it just felt like, and this was one of many conversations I was in. I was like, this conversation just feels like this. So I said to her, asked her a question. I said, like, what's needed for us to have reparations in this country? She said, unless the teaching of Black history is in place, then it's, it's challenging because the Holocaust is taught, right? And there was initiatives prior to a lot of the changes that were happening. There were educational, not just like in the curriculum, but like museums, etc. So like in the public discourse. So I think it planted a seed in me, and yeah. So I kind of see the work that we do. It's intertwined. It's reclaiming our narratives for the purpose of like full repair. Um, and I think a lot of that repair will start with ourselves. I say learning like knowledge of oneself is important to reclaim that power. The power is not going to come from government. Can do,
Mm.
but it's like 10% of it. So I think like it's important for one to know the history, to know where one is going, which should be the repair, the reparatory justice.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense, right? Like if you can understand what's happened, then we can understand the reparations are obvious. I don't know. pretty obvious, I guess. So what is that book? What does it look like then? What does the book? What does it include? Like what kind of things are you writing in the book?
Yeah. So I was very privileged this year to spend some time in the Caribbean to really understand like what reparations actually actually means and
Mhm.
what it looks like on the ground, because again I think those two conversations are very divorced. Like it seems like there's a reparations conversation in the UK, and there's a reparations conversation in the Caribbean, and those two are interconnected, but they're had in very different contexts because the needs are different, right? Um, but I don't think we can have a conversation about reparations unless it's connected to what's happening in the Caribbean. The educational curriculum is still very whitewashed. The lands are still being stolen.
Mm.
Um, well, if one could argue if the land's like if you can actually say that it's stolen because it's already stolen land, so it's like twice stolen land. But yeah, you know what I mean. Um, and then we're thinking about the tourism sector that is not benefiting anybody that is from the Caribbean. So I think that it's just kind of creating a picture for us to understand what reparatory justice could look like with the support of us in the UK to create a conversation that is more broader and
Okay.
accessible, and it's not to be had at the bottom of a house. So
Oh god. What are those conversations in the Caribbean? Like what kind of conversations do you have about reparations? Like what are the kind of
oh,
demands?
well, I think the difference that exists primarily to me between the Caribbean and the UK is that there's 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 an actual heritage of commemoration, whereas in the UK it's always like, oh, let's just talk about Windrush Month because it's, we might get a brand partnership to talk about the culture. And it doesn't. It's divorced. Like there's no substance to it. So like you have Labor Day here, you have Emancipation Days, you have um Kadooment Days, you have all types of like days that actually are meant to support the the society to remember what has been done, but to also integrate it into the now. And like um I think the conversations are being held by not only like Rastafarian communities, that being held in government now because it's more of like a popular discourse. It's being held with organizations like the Repair campaign. who are kind of active on the ground, working with students, working with researchers to kind of bring these pieces together. And I think that the sentiment is more than just, oh, let's remember this is some kind of like distant thing, but it's actually part of how we do things. It's part of like a series or conversations, and yeah, it's open.
Okay. Were you surprised that you said the curriculum is still whitewashed in the Caribbean?
Yeah, because I was disappointed because I really felt that maybe naively there'll be more information that accurately empowers students. And I say the students because, like, you think about the cultural capital. Not, I'm not gonna focus on the Caribbean as a whole. Like specifically Jamaica, the cultural capital of Jamaica is just beautiful. It's worldwide. It's ingrained. It's like and it can't be quantified. It can be, but it can't be at the same time. And I think about the power of the youth, right? Not only from music to like the arts and like just even athletics, right? We see a lot of that. But I'm like, what if we actually had like avenues for students from the Caribbean to like use their agency and take what they're learning into careers? We have a lot of students leaving the Caribbean to pursue knowledge in Canada, to pursue knowledge in the UK, or like to get work because there's no work here. Um, or it's hard to get work, or it's not even hard to get work. It's hard to get work that is gonna allow you to be competitive in this society. And I think that there's there is my disappointment came in because there was a huge disconnection between what's taught and the reality. It's like it's just two very different things. So it's always like we could be setting our students up for success if they were able to capitalize off their cultural capital to turn what they're learning into something that could actually boost the economy, support their communities and more. And I think there's just such a missed opportunity because of the fact that we're still experiencing the remnants of enslavement, you know, um, in many ways. And yeah, so I kind of felt disappointed, but I think there are also people who are doing this work, but perhaps not in like the ways that we would do it in the UK.
Yeah.
To teach, history, but through drama, through the arts, through, you know, all types of ways. So there is hope.
Okay. There's always hope. What's it like writing a book? You enjoying it? Writing?
No, I I was so new to it. I think naively, I always come into things like, yeah, it's easy, man. So even with the black curriculum, just going to the Department for Education, I literally thought it would be that easy. So I thought, yeah, writing a book, light work. I've done the dissertations at university. No, it was the amount of revisions that you had to do with a book, the process of just like even communicating your ideas. Uh, it's all new to me, working with editors, agents, like it's not easy. So I think that it's been a really good learning curve, but the first book writing process has not been easy at all. No.
No. Um, I don't know your experience, but I'm guessing most people are white in the publishing. Who was
Yes.
gonna guess? I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. You guess right. Yeah.
Has that been a difficulty you think with the subject matter, the topic that you're talking about? Has that
Absolutely. Um, absolutely. At the same time, I do think that there was attempts, successful and unsuccessful, to understand
Yeah.
not only where I'm coming from, but also the material. Um, and also to see this is not a buzz thing. Like this is history. It's history. It's empowerment. It's not just like a cute thing. And I think the publishing industry likes
Mm.
cute things that they can stick in waterstones, but it's not that. So I'm willing to, as long as it takes. Because why I'm like, I don't know when it's coming out. It's coming out, but I want to make sure that it's done properly. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's important, right? To get it done the way it needed to be done.
exactly.
Um, Okay, last question. I'm gonna ask you. We know the book's coming out, but what else is for the future? What else is gonna? What else you got planned?
Okay, so two things. I released a poetry collection called 27 that is looking at cultural heritage, memory, and the future. And that's available to order currently on my website. Also, I'm working with a few um, cultural partners in the UK to produce more accessible conversations on reparations. And then lastly, a friend and I have set up an organization called the Racial Impact and Sustainability Collective, which basically looks at justice in the grant making world. Because as an entrepreneur and as CEO of a startup that has taken incredible efforts from a number of people over the years, obtaining grants and understanding the grant world is not easy. And I think that if I could, support with bringing the ladder down in this journey and supporting social entrepreneurs to access not only grants but capital in the UK to make sure that the work we do is respected, then I will do that. So that's what my focus is at the moment, of course, as well as the Black curriculum, which we're doing a number of things. But yeah, trying to stay busy, making an impact, doing things I love.
Yeah, it's great to see. I mean, you must be young, right? I'm guessing you're still quite young. How old are you? Just
Yeah, I'm 27. So 27 is named after this year because I feel like this has been one of the
female,
best years of my life. So yeah, I'm 27.
which is really impressive. All the stuff you've done at this
Thank
point
you.
as
Thank
well.
you. Yeah, I'm gonna retire soon.
And you still have hope. I guess I'm one positive. You do definitely have hope with that curriculum where we're going.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the hope for me resides in like young people. I know it sounds
Mm.
so cliche, but I really, really do believe that like with the right support, investment tools, time, communities, we can do something great. And I think I was only able to do this because older people believed in me, because they showed me where the grants were, they helped refine my ideas. And so what if that was to happen more with young people before they get lost and go into corporates and, you know, never turn back. So yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for all the work you've done. We'll put all the links in the show notes as well. So please do follow, check, click everything, support, buy the poetry collection, buy the book when it comes out.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for your time, Rich. Really interesting to hear.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Kendi. It's so great to chat.